So I have about 20-25 minutes to give a short overview about the index. But before I go to that, I will also present our team, because as always, it's not one man behind that or one lady, it's always a team, and this is a team effort. First of all, Marko Künnapuu, who is sitting there, he's expert of e-governance academy, but at the same time he works for the Ministry of Justice as well. And he has been the chairman of the Council of Europe Cybercrime Convention Committee for several years. So not anymore, but he was. Then we have Priit Roosimägi, who is unfortunately not here today, but who was the the head of cybersecurity development department at the Estonian Information Systems Authority. Then we have Mari Pedak. Is Mari Pedak here? She's our expert as well. He's probably have a meeting with somebody. But Mari has holding several positions in Estonia. She was the Director General of the Citizenship and Migration Board when Estonia introduced ID card. And later she was leading the ICT agency under the Ministry of Interior Affairs. And then we have Agu Kivimägi, who is behind there. And Agu Kivimägi has worked under the Ministry of Interior several years at the ICT agency, and he's very deep technical and strategic expert as well. But that's not all. We have a lot of different contributing experts, like Agu Leinfeld from Tallinn company, Helen Popp from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ivar Jung, who is the IT professional, Jana Sahk, Jüri Jõemaa, Kalev Pihl, Katre Savi, Kristjan Prikk, Mari Seeba, Piret Pernik, and Toomas Viira. And last but not least, I would like to thank you, Madam Kaljurand, who was actually behind the initiation of the project a couple of years ago, because we had this idea from 2012 when there was no other indexes in this field. But Marina was the person who initiated the project at the end of 2014, and we kicked off last year, and now it took about a year to develop the methodology and start to gather data. And also I would like to thank Helen Popp from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is not here today, but he was part of that team as well, and also Kaili Terras and her department from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it was a broad set of persons who were actually behind the development. But a little bit about the background. As we all know, information society brings great deal of positive impact to the society. And I'm not going to go deep in that because we had yesterday the whole day to talk about that. We can have governance efficiency, we can be economically more competitive, and people just like to use that. Because when we can vote from Australia, from New Zealand, from US for Estonian Parliament without being physically in Estonia, that's a great benefit and people really like that. So information society brings different good benefits with it. But as we all know, unfortunately, we have to deal with the dark side of the information society and cyberspace as well. And this is, as we all know, there are some accidents that might happen. There are also criminality and terrorism behind different incidents and attacks organized by nation states as well. Estonia has felt that, what it means. And this brings us to different denial of service incidents, data integrity breaches, data confidentiality breaches. And we have seen what might happen. Several years ago, there was an attack against Iran nuclear power facility, and if there is a capability to take down a nuclear power facility which is really well protected, then certainly the threat is clear and present. So in order to deal with these threats, first of all, we have to protect our national cyberspace, and we have to do it at the several levels. First of all, we need baseline security. These are very simple things. We have to put locks on the doors, close the doors. We have to build fences over the buildings. So we have to do the basic things. Cyber hygiene is part of that as well. But in certain cases, that's not enough. Estonia experienced that in 2007. We had all that in place, but then we had to deal with incident and crisis management. And this is the different set of measures what nations should take in order to ensure the security of their cyberspaces. And then we can categorize the incidents and crises that some of them are these that police forces needs to deal with, but military should have certain capabilities as well if there is a really large threat against the national security. So now the question is that, okay, we develop our information societies, we see more and more different electronic services, all modern states have become a little bit dependent on the ICT systems. And now the question comes that how can we know how secure our national cyberspace actually is? And that's the question that the index wants to solve. We want to show through the index how securely countries have actually built up their national digital societies. And we measure two main things in the index. First of all, we measure how prepared countries are to prevent the realization of the cyber threats. That's the first part, that's the basic security part. And secondly, what is the readiness to manage cyber incidents, small incidents and large-scale crises as well. Through the index, we will give you three things. First of all, we are going to rank, or we're actually ranking countries according to the evidences, which we have found from the public sources and what your officials have sent to us. The second thing is the cybersecurity database. So because we are going to, and we already do that, we show all these evidence materials. So when you see that certain country has gained some points, then you see the links why we think so as well. So you can go there and be sure that the data is correct. And also the index points out main aspects of national cybersecurity, so it works as a capacity building checklist as well. So there are the most important aspects of national cybersecurity, what we think every country should implement at the national level. But that's not all. During the process, we got many different ideas how to develop this environment further, because it's an online environment with different data, and we have already ideas that in coming years we're going to develop different applications for this index. Like you can compare it to different countries, you have different development charts there, and also we are going to provide different document templates. So for example, if country wants to develop the national cybersecurity strategy, there is the template including all or most important aspects of national cybersecurity. So it's a little bit like a guideline that everybody who wants can use. Of course, you don't need to do that, but that's the possibility. Also, we have idea to develop report templates. So, and we're going to put there most important aspects that usually the strategic leadership wants to get or wants to have this information about national cybersecurity. And that's not all. We have many different ideas how to take this project ahead. The index itself was developed in 5 steps. The first step was the identification of the main cyber threats. So these are the 3. threat to electronic services, so somebody can just deny it, or there could be a technical failure, for example. There is also the data integrity breach, which is quite significant or actually fundamental at the state level, and threat against the confidentiality as well. When we defined these threats, we developed capacities and measures, what we thought are important that countries should implement. But after that, we selected just some of these measures, because in reality, the problem is that we cannot measure everything. We cannot measure the motivation of people. We cannot measure at the moment how countries have implemented the systems. For example, the digital identity. At the moment, there is no global data, how many countries, what is the percentage of people using digital identity, for example. But these aspects will come a little bit later. So the point here is that at the moment, the reality is that we cannot measure everything about national cybersecurity. And once we wanted to make this index on evidence-based, we had to select certain aspects. And after that, we developed different indicators, and we grouped these indicators to, let's say, eatable format, so it's easy to understand what we want to present. The focus in the index was, as I mentioned, on measurable aspects of national cybersecurity implemented by the central government. So, and here is the picture which shows that what we were actually able to measure. We were able to measure whether or not there is legislation in place that gives the basis for national cybersecurity. As you heard yesterday, what our president said, that it comes down to that how countries have regulated their cyberspace. And it applies in the e-governance area, and it applies in the cybersecurity area as well. Then we are able to measure whether or not the countries have fundamentally important organizations in place. Then we can measure a little bit the cooperation formats, whether or not they exist, and finally the outcomes of these different inputs. So like, is there a strategy, whether or not the country is conducting exercises, cyber crisis exercises, for example, and whether or not certain technologies are implemented. And we prove, or we collect this information from official websites and from official documents. So these are the two evidence materials that we put on the index webpage as well. So totally, we have 4 groups in the index. We have 12 capacities defined, and we have 78 different indicators. And the index looks like that. So the first area or first group is general indicators. There we measure 3 things: whether or not the country is able to develop cybersecurity policies, then whether or not they can develop threat assessments, how the education is organized in that field. These are the first 3. Then we have baseline indicators. There we measure whether or not the country has a standard, for example, how the e-services are secured, whether or not the country has electronic identity and digital signature implemented, critical information infrastructure protection, and so on. So you can find it later from the website. And under each capacity, we measure these 4 things, as I showed in previous slides: legal arrangements, organizational aspects, cooperation formats, and different outcomes. Now it's a little bit complicated slides. It shows how we actually count the points. I'm not going to go in deep in that, but the main thing is that the NCSI score on the website shows that what is the percentage that country has fulfilled in this index. So it doesn't show the points, total points, but it shows the percentage that the country has got from this index. And I'm explaining why we did it so. First of all, we did it because we see that we're going to change certain capacities and indicators in coming years. So in this case, the maximum score is always 100%. So it's easier to measure this way. And secondly, as Madame Kaljurand already mentioned, we want to relate this cybersecurity score to the Information Society Development Score. So we also show the Information Society Development Score, which is put together according to the ICT Development Index, which is developed by United Nations, and Network Readiness Index, which is developed by the World Economic Forum. And the ratio shows the relationship between these two indexes. About the data collection, as I mentioned, we take data from public sources, and also we have sent our findings to the government officials, and some of them have already replied, so we have more accurate information. And on the website, you will see whether or not the data is collected from public sources or it is already confirmed by the state officials as well. After that, we do the inspection, and our team confirms the data, and then we publish it. But the most important aspect is that the main responsibility for updating this data lies on countries. So we expect all of you to check first whether or not your country is already listed in this index, and if not, then we ask you to contact us to provide this data. Or another option is that we collect the data and we will send it to you for confirmation. So we ask you to cooperate in this regard. And it works this way. So if you see that there is some mistake or you want to update your data, you send this proposal, we inspect that, we look at if or not the evidence material is clear, and then we publish it. And what is important regarding this index is that we don't do it this way that, like some indexes do, that they collect the data 2 years, and then they make it as a PDF, and then they publish it. We want that index to be online environment. So if countries have changed something or they have made improvements, then they can send this evidence material to us immediately, and we check it and we publish it. So it's online environment. It's not something that we publish every second year. And here you see the development logic that we have planned. We are here at the moment. So the idea is already 4 years old. We initiated this project last year. It took about a year to develop the methodology. Then we did pilot testing in Estonia and in Moldova. We found out that the first draft was too complicated, so it was 150 indicators. We reduced it to 78, so it's easier to fill. Now we are here. Today we published the first website, but we continue this work. The data collection we have planned for 2 years, so actually we already have seen that probably by the end of 2016 you can check and we have most of the data there. But once it's done, then it's question about little changes. We work already with the second version of the methodology, and next year we're going to publish the next version of that, version 2. And also what we have planned for the next year is to organize international management for this index. So we're going to organize a management board which is together internationally. We can check whether or not certain indicators are relevant or not, and we can add them to the index or take them away according to the development of national cybersecurity. So that's the plan. And you can go to the website and check it yourself. And I will very shortly show you how does the website look like and what you can do actually on the website. So here it is. If you go first to the website, it looks like this. There is some news and updates and word coverage. But there, when you click on the index, then you get this picture. And here you see these different indicators. There are 12 of them. These show the capacities, the most important ones. Then you can click on there, and you can open a more specific view. And you can see what we actually measure. What are the most important aspects, and how many points we give for this certain aspect. If you want to go even deeper, then you, from the first page, you can go to the methodology, and there, at the very end, there are more specifically explained what we actually measure, what are the reference materials, and how we give points. So you can go deeper. But with the index, you can see at the moment Australia is leading that. But it's like a constant competition. If, for example, if Poland is developing their systems ahead, then we make changes in the index and they can go further than Australia. But here is the situation at the moment. We have already put to the index 9 countries. We get this week information about the Netherlands. In coming weeks, we get information about Norway, and we have several other countries who are confirming this information at the moment. And once we get this new information, we put it immediately to the website. And here you can also see that this is the security score 58.59, and this is the ICD score. That's the Information Society Development Score. So it shows that Australia, for example, have fulfilled 80% of the Information Society indexes, but in the security side, about 60%. So the ratio is about 20. And why we show it this way? Because there are certain countries who are not maybe so developed in the e-governance field, in information society field. And it's logical to think that if the information society is not so developed, then they don't need to put resources so much to cybersecurity either. That's why we show that. Let's take Nepal, for example. So they have, or there is the better example is Pakistan. So they get about 35% of the cybersecurity index and about 35% from the information society development indexes. So the ratio is just 0.17. So it shows that the cybersecurity and the information society development are quite well balanced. So it shows very broadly whether or not the cybersecurity is ahead of the information society development or vice versa. Usually it's vice versa. Usually everybody wants to develop a lot of different e-services and later think about cybersecurity. That's why we see at the moment that all of these countries have negative ratio. But the ideal goal, of course, is from our point of view that this number here is green and the ratio is positive. And then you can go to the country and you get here the list, for example, with the links, and you will see why we gave 2 points for this certain aspect, and you can go to the links and see yourself whether or not this evidence material is relevant. So it takes a little bit of time to download this link. But with every aspect, we measure it this way. So that's very shortly overview about this index. And I think we have a little bit time, 5 minutes here. If there are any questions, then we can take these questions.
Yes, there are already, we see a couple of questions. First is coming here and second here. Yeah. Madam Minister actually will get the first question. No. Okay, you will wait. Okay. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Raul from Azerbaijan, Minister of Communication. First of all, I want to express thanks for your contribution to indexing and statistic job, because it's really important part of any cybersecurity approach and projects. But my question is very simple. Why we should use this indexing? So what makes it unique for countries to use it? And next question might be, what actually will differentiate your indexing approach from others? It might some international indexing systems and other research center indexing. So what makes you unique from others? Thank you very much.
Okay. I put the slide which explains that as well. First of all, there are not many indexes in this field. ITU launched their index 1.5 years ago, and that's the only one I would say that has comprehensive overview about national cybersecurity globally. But it was also very first step for them. That was version 1. They are working at the moment with version 2, and they hope to publish it this year, because the first version was quite simple. Now they have taken more sophisticated approach. The second index, what is there, is developed by Melissa Hathaway. We all know that she was the former advisor to Obama administration. But this index is not public. We don't see how she actually counts the score. So you can actually, if you want to see that, you have to pay to her to get this understanding. So it's not public. And there's several initiatives which are more like publications, not global indexes. So there are also certain initiatives which try to measure certain areas in the world, but not with the idea to have global reach. So we basically want to provide second opinion what ITU gives you, as it's normal. We see it all the time in the ICT development field. As I mentioned, there is the ICT development index, there is the network readiness index. It's just not good if there is only one index you can count on. If you get the second opinion, then you can probably have better understanding of the situation.
Okay.
And also, very quickly, ITU is measuring from this like a point of view. They measure certain legal aspects, certain organizations which are in place, but they have not categorized the capacities. And I would say that it's really, really different if you, we cannot just talk about the legal system or legal act in the cybersecurity field. It has to be related to something. It has to be related to policy development or baseline security or crisis management. So there cannot be just one legal act for that or a couple of acts. There are certain areas where we want to measure whether or not the legislation in place or organizations. But that's a long story. I welcome you to the cybersecurity workshop after that, so we can go into more deeper discussion.
Thank you, and I hope that your index will be not second opinion, but first opinion.
Yes, that's true, of course.
Okay,
Raul,
yep.
first of all, congratulations to you and to your team, and I'm really proud of being a little godparent to the project. My question concerns the international influence. How do you measure it? And how do you measure big countries, small countries? Because some countries are more active, others maybe are not so active, but contributing more to international influence. And how well is Estonia doing there?
Estonia is doing, of course, very well. That's why we put this indicator there. But
it's still not in the first 10 countries, as I see.
Yes,
or maybe it's after Nepal. Is it number 10, yeah?
Yes, that's
okay.
Little aspect that Estonia is not in the index at the moment because we have too accurate data about Estonia. And we will publish the Estonian score when we have, I think, about 50 countries there. But we have the data about Estonia, of course.
Okay, but about international
yes,
outreach?
international influences, you can not probably see from there, but we measure, for example, whether or not Ministry of Foreign Affairs have a specific cybersecurity unit. It's either department or organization, and unfortunately Estonia doesn't get points from that, because Estonia has a cybersecurity coordinator and of course the minister who is very interested in cybersecurity, but we have to measure like sustainability of the system. That's why we give points if the organization have if the country has a specific unit. And also we measure whether or not the country has part of the cybercrime convention, or if the country has agreements with other countries, bilateral ones, and then whether or not there is an international organization in the country, and whether or not the country does capacity building in other countries. So these are the aspects.
Thanks, and I'll explain to those, why don't we have a unit? We've discussed it for several times in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we prefer to have the people who are dealing with cyber, e-governments, development cooperation to be in the real departments. So one cyber coordinator for the ministry, but the other people who are doing human rights division, development cooperation, e-governance, development cooperation. So we thought that it's better to keep them within the real functional departments.
Okay.
I already feel that I have to answer these questions to several ministers around the world. Because they
Okay, we have two last questions. Yes, please.
Hello. I also had a question about how to measure international influence, but thank you. Also, I have a question about hackers. Do you measure somehow, do you include the hackers from abroad, for example? How did you include them in the measurement first, and then how do you relate with the UN methodology, like e-government, do you e-policy? Do you include it to your ranking, or vice versa? Will they include your index into their methodology?
For the second question, we have, I think, about 50% of the indicators are the same that the UN has, but we have organized them differently, and we have asked also certain aspects that UN doesn't ask. But for the first question, could you specify a little bit the hacker part?
Well, for example, there are hackers from the country XYZ, and do you include this country as a good, say figures
You mean
into
like
this?
if the country has a good hackers, whether or not we count them there?
Right, right.
That's usually not part of the security. It's more like attacking capacity, but we don't measure the cyber power. We don't measure that, how country can, what they can do in the cyberspace to harm others. We measure that how
active protection measures.
Exactly. We try to measure how well this country is secured.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different thing.
Okay. Yeah, please, madam.
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Agnes Kasper. I'm from Tallinn University of Technology. And thank you very much for the very interesting introduction. And surely you have done a great job. I'm really interested in this index. I would like to ask you about whether the index gives any information about the effectiveness of these measures that the countries are taking. You see, there are a lot of measures and taken as evidence that countries are doing something about trying to prepare and be ready for managing incidents. But whether these steps are effective or not, is there any indication about that?
That's, I would say that in certain aspects we can measure the effectiveness. And we can measure the effectiveness through the outcomes. So whether or not the country has the policy, and whether or not the country conducts cyber crisis exercises, for example. But in reality, I think it's pretty much the situation like, can we measure how well is country's defense organized? in order to understand that, we should organize a small war to understand whether or not the country is effective. So in the cyber side is the same difficulty. We cannot actually measure the real effectiveness because there are factors like motivation, how well the coordination has organized. So all these aspects we cannot actually measure. There is only one thing what we have planned to measure in the future is that how, for example, what is the percentage that population uses digital identity in certain countries. But at the moment there is no global data about that. Even in Estonia it's quite hard to get this data. But when we develop the methodology how to get this data, then we will immediately put it in the index. And if you have good ideas, we are also looking for partners who want to develop this index further together. So if you have good ideas how to measure certain aspects, then you are very welcome to contact us.
Okay, thank you. And very last question, down there.
Hello, my name is Maria. I'm from University of Tartu. I admired by your presentation, and I have a question concerning this public and private sector. You measure only public sector or private as well? Because as we know, in country could be, and they are these big companies who has good capabilities in this mitigating threats, different like risks in cybersecurity. So you measure only public sector or private as well?
At the moment we measure mostly public sector, but we have included certain aspects of the private sector as well, because we measure how government has organized the critical infrastructure protection. And because critical infrastructure is mostly in the private sector in many, many countries, then we measure that as well. But we cannot measure directly how well private sector has organized themselves, because then the question is that should we measure all companies in the country? And that's impossible. Or there is the question that how to do that.
Are you ask data from private companies or only from public sector?
No, we don't ask data from private companies, because as I mentioned that then you should measure all private companies, but that's pretty much impossible task. So we are looking for methodology how to do that. We have already cooperated with Norway in this regard in order to add more and more these private aspects as well. But at the moment we don't have good methodology how to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your good questions. I understand there is much more questions, but you can continue the discussion in